I know from, as you said, the life experience, how it feels when one's homeland is dying in
Mm.
front of your eyes and you cannot do anything.
Do you feel we're all aboard the Titanic, and sometimes it's hard to find where we have hope that we really will survive events like the conflict in the Gulf right now? My guest on the Burning Archive today is Biljana Vankovska, a political scientist, professor of international relations, and professor of peace studies at St. Cyril and Methodius University in Skopje, Macedonia. And she is a long-term peace activist who has also experienced the tragedies of war and conflicts within her homeland, indeed the bombing of her homeland by NATO. We spoke in the day after Donald Trump gave a 5-day reprieve on his planned bombing of Iran. And it happened also to be the 24th of March, the anniversary of NATO's 78-day aerial bombing campaign of Serbia, the former Yugoslavia, in 1999, with its devastating effects on the country. I hope you enjoyed this wonderful interview, which covers Biljana's deep understanding of international issues, her Substack at biljanavankovska.substack.com, and also the grounds we all have for hope that we really will survive, being all aboard the Titanic. Welcome, Biljana Vankovska, to the Burning Archive.
Thank you for having me.
Biljana, you're a professor of political science and peace studies at the University at Skopje in Macedonia, and a long-term peace activist. And we're going to be talking about some of your thoughts on the global situation. You've called it wonderfully in some of your recent articles, including this sort of sense that we're all aboard the Titanic and the captain's gone mad and shooting the passengers, something like that at the moment. We wanted to start, particularly given we're recording this a day or so after Donald Trump paused his 48-hour ultimatum and then gave a 5-day pause on further military action against Iran in the current conflict. And you're actually a member with, I think, Vijay Prashad and a number of other people of the No Cold War Collective who've actually produced a statement on this in the last few days. So perhaps we can just begin with your assessment of what's happening right now, how much danger is the world in right now, and what's the sort of your sense of how people perhaps should respond to it.
Yes, thank you for starting with this statement, because I find it very important. Of course, there are a lot of people engaged into this topic, or groups who are trying to appeal to raise the public awareness of the dangers we are facing as humanity. No Cold War Collective brings together leftists. That is, I think, very important to know. And we are from all continents, so from countries from all over the world. I'm afraid nobody from Australia yet. But we meet on a weekly basis, in between as well, whenever possible. And unfortunately, the world is going through such a turbulent period that occasionally we feel urged to come up with a statement, with appeal, with whatever action we can do in this virtual sphere, because some of us live in Korea, others are in Africa, in Latin America. So this particular statement on Iran war actually we name it endless war because we see the pattern of at least 5 ongoing conflicts carried out by United States and Israel. At least 3 of them are with these 2 actors. There are wars of choice or even genocide of choice. And the other 2, of course, there are a lot of other conflicts, and we had to skip some of them, so not to burden this text with a long list of bad records of what's going on in the world. We drafted the statement in terms of pointing out who is behind all these war efforts. So we did not discover anything new that many people don't know already. But we try not to mention Donald Trump because we feel that Donald Trump is, just one of the many presidents of the United States that is now in the focus of the media. So many analysts go analyzing what did he say yesterday or what he is saying now or will say tomorrow. So we try to put these wars into a larger context, historical context, and to say that the US capitalism, or as we in the No Cold War call it hyper imperialism, run by the only superpower that is militarily so reckless that can do whatever it wants. So far, nobody to stop it. So we try to frame that into this scheme and to list the 5 most important ongoing conflicts, and to show that these are interrelated. You cannot analyze Gaza without Iran or vice versa, Lebanon. And then, of course, we pay attention to what's going on in Latin America, Venezuela, the kidnapping of the president, and Cuba that is under genocidal blockade because it is a genocide by other means, I would say. So that is this introductory part where we portray the state of affairs at the moment and we say how dangerous it is. But I think that the most powerful part is the last, the ending of that statement, and I would like our followers to pay attention to that. I think that this part is very important, that we cannot afford to be demoralized and to fall into despair and to be weaker than the people who are actually suffering on the ground and fighting back. We find that Iran is fighting back heroically. Donald Trump is surprised. Many of us are not, because this looks like how people who love their country are ready to actually apply the UN Charter, the famous article about the self-defense. So the irony of this is that the UN Security Council, as we know, held emergency session, and instead of denouncing the aggression on Iran, they switched the ball and they said it is Iran that is an aggressor and attacking the neighboring country, the Gulf countries, where actually the US capital and these corporate interests are located in these rich Gulf countries that are practically military bases of United States, as we can see nowadays. So I have to pay tribute here to Vijay Prashad, who is such a wonderful, true revolutionary who manages to find strength to fight back against our common despair. Because personally, I'm the one who often tends to see, the global picture and to to be empathetic with the suffering people, with the children suffering everywhere. Maybe because I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I work on peace studies, so somehow these violent scenes really have a strong effect on me. But Vijay has a cure for that. And I think he is right when he reminds all of us, and probably the wider audience, that people are struggling. So we need to stand by them, to give them our support, to appeal to our governments, to make them not sleep nicely during the night, and to remind them all the time. And let's hope that this is just one symbolic move from our side to say that we are not giving up. We find that the world is, the common humanity is at stake, and that we all deserve better lives that we live here, regardless if our countries are currently not affected directly. Sooner or later, we will see the real effects of this huge catastrophe unfolding in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf region, and Iran, and Gaza as well, and Lebanon, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that is something that we try to do. And let me just mention here, because some people believe that we are just sitting behind our laptops or computers and type and write whatever comes to our mind. No, some of us are actively on the ground. And Vijay just got back from Cuba. He was in Venezuela recently, so he lives in Chile. So he is able to report back on the situation on the ground, where he meets people. He sees the suffering with his own eyes. I'm unable to go there, but I'm grateful that somebody who was there to see then shares that experience with us. And when you see Palestinians not giving up, then it would be really cowardly from each of us to say, I feel bad, I feel hurt, I don't feel, peaceful in these times, because they are struggling on a daily basis, and they're so resilient that we should all pay respect to their heroism, I would say, even under such circumstances.
Absolutely. And and there's the statement in the Cold War collective statement saying that the human spirit is far too strong to be vanquished by tormentors. It uses every avenue, as you should, to refuse a world in which this history of war without end determines our future. So, it's a very important statement, and it does connect to this, I guess, feeling so many of us have that there are, we feel so impotent, I guess, in the face of such terrible events. And, for different people, different events have different meanings, a more or less priority in their lives, depending on what their connections with the relevant people are. But just this impending sense of catastrophic war, and certainly the conflict in Iran, Gulf, West Asia at the moment is now, threatening food security in many countries around the world, and all sorts of things like this. So it has potentially catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And so simply just, I guess, escaping or just falling into the trap of just treating it as like an entertainment, I guess, a political entertainment,
escapism,
a sort of a news story, or is not really where we want to be. So, thank you for talking about that. And as I said, people can read the No Cold War statement at your Substack, which they should definitely check out. And I'll include a link in the video description below. but you've also been writing some fantastic things on your Substack. I'll just go to the post section so it's easier to see. Recently, this piece on do we recognise a global war and when we see one, the remarkable tribute to Professor Morandi, which I don't want to read out the title of that one, just not to tempt the gods, I think. But,
I know some people reacted on the title, probably out of superstition that we do not call some bad fortune on him. My explanation is, and the motivation was different. We usually pay tribute and write obituaries and pieces after one great person leaves this world. So I think that some people deserve to be paid respect while they are alive, to hear our voice and our respect for what they are doing. I know Professor Morandi for several years now. Even personally, we met last year. It was a warm meeting of people that used to communicate virtually through various forms of messaging and platforms. But it was a very warm meeting of two friends, of two people who understand each other, even coming from different parts of the world. And what I saw there was really very much in harmony with my idea about the man who I had been following through YouTube and other forms of public engagement. So I really feel for him, and I also share your concern about his safety. And I think last night he was a guest at some podcast, I don't remember which one, where he said that his friends were advising him to take care, to just stop being present on the media because he makes himself a target. These cruel aggressors eliminated literally the whole leadership, everybody that is worked in that society, from scientists to medical doctors, engineers. Why would not they just remove a voice that is very important in the global arena? So I sent that piece to him. I hope he saw it. Of course, I understand that he doesn't have time to send the messages back. But some people found the title inappropriate or but my idea was really noble. I just want to say I wish him a long life. I wish his country the best outcome of this nightmare. But I still wanted to do it now rather sooner than, God forbid, later.
Indeed. And I think it's a very moving piece. People should absolutely read it. I think it's a wonderful thing that you did. So thank you. It was also you also wrote a piece on the 4th anniversary of the war in Ukraine. There have been so many terrible things happen in recent years, and you've written quite a bit on the war in Ukraine, as well as through the Transnational Foundation for, I can never quite remember the full name.
Long name, yeah. Yes. For Peace and Future Research.
Peace and Futures. Talked about various proposals to try to activate a more realistic peace process there as well. But it was in that piece that you talked about this sense that we're all aboard the Titanic. And I wonder if you could say a bit how you've been personally responding to this sense of disaster everywhere as well, because I mean you're life experience as well as your professional experience as an academic and a peace studies specialist has also been about managing or not responding to the conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, the Balkans, through the 1990s, etc., and managing the sort of issues to do with post-conflict societies as well. But how have you been experiencing these terrible times for the last, I don't know, well, at least 4 years?
Probably longer because, I know from, as you said, the life experience, how it feels when one's homeland is dying in front of your eyes and you cannot do anything. Yugoslavia was the country in which I was born. I was educated. I loved it as any child or young person loves, feels for his or her country. And it collapsed in such a bloody way that it was unbelievable. Up to that moment, believe it or not, I had other ideas about my academic career. For example, I got a position as a younger teaching assistant at the Institute for Defense and Security Studies. So my older colleagues wanted me to focus more on military stuff and things like that. So I actually got my PhD on civil military relations, trying to focus on the Yugoslav People's Army. And that was a time of liberal influences coming from, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the idea was that democracy is coming, as Fukuyama promised, as the only model. So we should just rearrange our society along these liberal principles. So actually, the war started while I was still writing on my thesis. So I had to rewrite every chapter once in a while before I came up with a full thesis. So that was the start of turmoil. That's something that affects you personally, because as a researcher who is directly involved and whose life is directly affected by the war and collapse of the state, you cannot be quite objective and detached from the object of your research. And it was actually sometime around 94, 95, when the war in Bosnia was already culminating, Srebrenica, and before that, Croatia and many other places around the region, that for the first time ever, I heard about the academic discipline called peace studies or peace and conflict research, depending on the academic center. So, and at that time, I was probably lucky because Macedonia was oasis of peace at that time. Macedonia, as a federal republic of Yugoslavia, was the only part of the federation that remained peaceful during the worst times for Bosnia, for Croatia, Kosovo later, and so on. So we had this opportunity to start learning why violence, how to deal with violence, which forms of violence, how to go through peaceful conflict resolution, even reconciliation. One of my latest textbooks before I retired last year in October was about transitional justice and reconciliation. So, my whole life and academic focus switched to something that was of urgent importance for my region. And I had a personal but also intellectual urge to learn more about ourselves. Because, even nowadays, when we talk about Iran, you will hear very often this phrase about balkanization of Iran as a maybe strategic goal of United States and Israel. So dismembering this huge country into small units. So the Balkan brings this negative context in its name, something that is very painful for us in the Balkans, because we never wanted, first of all, Balkans was never a state, one state. Many empires were coming and going and fighting over the territories of our countries. Yugoslavia was this pause of peace and development and almost utopian socialist paradise between the two military blocs, and Yugoslavia was neutral, it actually non-aligned. So growing up into that context and then witnessing the fall in everything you believed in and loved was really a very traumatic moment for me and for my generation, I believe. So it was the time when we established the Balkan Peace Center at my Faculty of Philosophy. We started learning, we started meeting people, for example, Johann Galtung, the father of peace research, and Håkan Wiberg, who was my personal guru and someone who actually was leading me through my new PhD. That was not a PhD, but my next academic paths that I was discovering. So I did not go into peace studies out of intellectual curiosity. It was a necessity. And nowadays, I cannot, detach myself from that experience. So that's why whenever I hear stories about ceasefire, about genocide, about this terrible effects of war, conflicts, I just cannot stand still and feel that it doesn't concern me. I know that these societies will have to go through long decades of reconstruction and rehabilitation and reconciliation, maybe one day. Of course, if we remain as a planet at one place, in one piece. So that is the background that brings me and makes me so engaged into this global conflict. But on the other hand, I have even written a piece on Substack. I was inspired by Hamid Dabashi, the famous and brilliant professor from Columbia University, of Iranian origin, but a brilliant mind, who wrote a book, Can Non-Europeans Think? So, referring to the global production coming only from the West, only in English. So there is this phenomenon of West-splaining. So the Westerners would come to our region, maybe tomorrow, to Iran, to I don't know where else, to teach the locals about themselves and how to deal with their problems. And they actually our experience in former Yugoslavia and the whole region shows that the medicines from the West, the liberal medicines, privatization, corporate peace, this works, one model fits all and things like that. There is no other alternative. NATO, EU reforms, blah, blah. That state building policy actually gives opposite effects. So we are going through this awakening phase of being aware that this triumph of liberalism is not what they said would be, that it's failing even in their own countries, even in the Western countries. Like they should be a model for us, the primitive, the violent societies. They are becoming opposite of what they claim to be. They preach one thing, they do another thing. So this double standard politics is now actually has boomerang effect on their societies. So that's why I believe that the global dialogue is very important, that we that are not fully Europeans, as Brussels would say, yes, you are on the continent, but you're not quite European. You should change your mentality, your culture. So in order to fit in our happy family, they're not happy family. They are militarizing themselves to that.
Yeah.
They are actually curtailing the freedoms and liberties of their own citizens. So they are not a role model anymore, I think, for nobody in the world. But maybe if we get into a more engaged discussion, that would be a productive dialogue. Maybe we can learn from each other.
Yeah, I think the international relations scholar Amitav Acharya, who's South Asian origin and works in the United States, he wrote a book last year called The Once and Future World Order, which was really partly describing how ideas that are often seen as Western inventions, like world order and indeed the United Nations Charter, have many cultural origins, effectively. And his argument at the end is we really need a much more respectful dialogue between, the many cultures of the world, rather than this sort of, West versus the rest kind of, Marco Rubio at Munich Security Dialogue, where one Western civilization. I was actually going to mention particularly the Serbian bombing in 1999, because there's this wonderful historian, Felipe Fernandez Armesto. I don't know if you know him, but
today is the anniversary of the bombings.
Yeah. Oh, is it really?
Yes, 24th of March. Yeah.
No.
Good that you mentioned it.
That's extraordinary. It was serendipitous, or somehow the spirits were working. But he wrote this book called Civilizations, which is a global perspective on civilizations, which really argues there's no hierarchy of civilizations, that civilizations have existed everywhere on the planet, and all that kind of stuff. And towards the end of the book, he discusses Atlantic civilization, and he talks about the NATO bombing and the wars in the former Yugoslavia in the 1990s. He wrote this book in 2000, and he's a Spanish, English, American man who's, probably conservative disposition. I don't really know what his politics are, but it has this sentence that when the Atlantic Alliance finally breaks down and Western civilization is split by political schism, this thoughtless warmongering, which is his description of the NATO attacks, may be seen as one of the acts which deservedly condemned it, exposing its flaws, undermining its civilized credentials. So there you go. I'm very glad I actually brought that up, because I didn't quite realize it was the anniversary of the bombing, but it's just a extraordinary event, and you've sort of lived through that experience. So now, in your article on where you talk about we are all aboard the Titanic, the next sentence you say in this brief statement, which seems to capture so much, is that salvation depends on resisting the logic of profit, power, and propaganda. And, the No Cold War statement talked about capitalism and all that sort of stuff. I just wonder, and we've talked a little bit about that, but how people far from profit and power can deal with things, and we might return to that. But one of the key issues there is propaganda, and I guess the role of intellectuals, the intelligentsia, and academia. And I know you and Jan Oberg have been quite critical of the military-industrial, academic, media, entertainment complex. Do you feel there's a sense, particularly in, what we call Western societies, that, academia, intelligentsia are sort of failing people to some degree? Or failing in their role in, I guess, helping people resist that kind of war propaganda?
In order to explain the wider phenomenon, I always go back to Antonio Gramsci, who is one of my favorite philosophers, and his idea about cultural hegemony. So it is what West has been doing for long time. Actually, you cannot oppress somebody without the oppressed being complicit into that and agreeing or capitulating or accepting the mindset of the oppressor. So in many of our countries, we have compradorial elites, and we have the mind of the intellectuals is formed within this Western framework of TINA. There is no alternative but the West, but the NATO, but EU, or whatever other values they claim to have. So that is that mental domination through academia, and I would not even put immediately the stress on the academia, which is the highest form of education, higher educational institutions, but even from the early age in schooling, the children are used to these forms of thinking. For example, I'll give you a very bizarre example in my country that was doing anything to get into NATO. And we had this problem with the name of Macedonia. I don't want to go there, but still, it was a long process of adjusting the whole society to NATO. And NATO was presented as the most peaceful organization on earth. Despite the bombing of Serbia and doing other things elsewhere. But it is a sort of normalization of military alliance, presenting it something good. And at that time, the current deputy of the Secretary General of NATO, a woman, Radmila Shekerinska, is coming from Macedonia. She was a minister of defense in our country, and they had a call for papers among the young pupils in elementary schools. They were asked to write, emotional poetry, essays, or something like that about NATO, and the title was. It sounds better, of course, in our language, but in English, the rough translation is NATO, NATO, you are our gold or our precious thing, something like that. So when you start growing up, bringing up generations in that spirit, they truly believe once they come into my classroom as a professor, their minds are shaped to a certain degree. I was always trying to play the role of Socrates and to spoil the youth in my classroom at least, and to give them different perspective, to challenge the knowledge they brought into my classroom. Exactly because of that, putting the individuals into the machinery. And I very much appreciate the critical pedagogy of Henry Giroux from Canada, an Canadian-American professor, who is brilliant in explaining the not only the betrayal of the intellectuals, but also the academia, the universities under siege, as he puts in one of his books, and they becoming a part of the military-industrial complex. Plus, we have the media complex and the censorship complex, and so think tank, and so a lot of parts of that mosaic that is actually creating this cultural hegemony. So the people are made to believe that there is no other option, that we should stop thinking creatively about anything, including wars. You know, when I listen to various geopolitical analysts, professors, colleagues from respected universities, you know, when they analyze the war, they rarely go astray and think about how to come to peace or to come to a better. It seems as if the war is a natural force. So we cannot do anything against the storm, the rain, the earthquake. So war is not vismare or something that we cannot deal with. We must. War is actually the failure of the humanity, of the capability of the human race to deal with its problem. And in peace studies, we usually start with this line that conflicts are not bad. It's not. It would be unnatural to not to have conflicts in societies, in communities, in our families, if you want. So these are normal things. It is a dialectics of different interests and positions and all that. But the moment that the conflict becomes violent, then is all our capacity put on test. Are we able to deal with that? You mentioned that I wrote this piece about Ukraine, the fourth anniversary, and I believed it would be, you know, very accurate in the right, timely in the moment. But then the war in Iran began, and Ukraine was pushed aside, as we all know. Even the Ukrainians are aware that whenever there is Gaza or Iran or something else, from time to time they're pushed aside out of the focus of the general public. But the war is taking lives there too. So I don't want to skip that part of the world. They're also struggling. They're also into some very, very complex situation. And I will tell you honestly that my first attendance at the Valdai conference, and my first visit to Russia at all, was 2 years ago. And I had the opportunity, probably my hosts didn't know much about me when they invited me to be a speaker on one of the first panels at the conference devoted to Ukraine. And I started with my peace perspective, you know. I was almost kicked out from the panel because some of the people who were the hardliners, and there are such in Russia, they left the room. They didn't want to listen to a different perspective. My perspective was not offering a solution. You know, you cannot from panel draw a map or make a proposition for a peace plan, but you can tell them, okay, guys, let's think that we're talking about living people, that we're talking about villages, about cities, about cultural heritage, about the future of this country. So let's not behave as chess players and, you know, look from above and be cold-minded and not paying attention to the price of each move on the ground. So some people didn't like that approach, and interestingly, only myself and my Chinese colleagues on the panel, we were on the same line. of course, next year I was invited, but never given the floor again. so we have to propose to mention that human side of the story, because it is not only about oil, only about geoeconomic and geopolitical developments and multipolarism and so on. So what I learned from the late Johann Galtung is that peace studies are a combination of mind and heart. You would not listen that sort of definition in other academic fields. They will say you have to be cold-minded, you have to use your intellect and to be objective, you have your methodology, but nothing more than that. You cannot involve your heart. On the contrary, in peace studies, I believe that if we are truly devoted to the subject of our research, we should be involved in human beings. I don't even accept, we are becoming like in the gladiator arena, where we are taking sides and rooting for this side or that side, because we are human beings. And first of all, for me, is if we start from that perspective, maybe everything else will come to a different solution and more humane approach to this. You cannot speak of Gaza as a Riviera, or you just you dehumanize the people on the ground wherever they are. So that is my approach. Maybe sounds too emotional or too biased or too humane. I don't know. People prefer cold-minded analysis.
I mean, I've not had any direct experience in resolving, military conflicts or anything like that. But I was a government official for a very long time, and you have to negotiate a lot of social conflicts. And to me, I mean, that kind of grounded, people-oriented perspective is also the most effective, ultimately, as well as the most humane. And like, there's a poet I love, Biljana Vankovska, who wrote a poem called "The End and the Beginning." The first line is, after every war, someone has to clean up, and then she describes, fixing the broken, shattered windows, and
Exactly.
wheeling away the corpses and all this sort of stuff, and she gently mocks all the people sort of yapping about causes and effects. But I do wonder, even with like the Russia, the Russia-Ukraine NATO war, as I always describe it as, whether, if you like, more engagement with the actual practical, peace-building processes of resettlement and rebuilding, etc., is actually a pathway for people to just put aside some of the ideological and the built-up resentment sort of conflicts over the years, and for Russia and Europe to actually, and the Ukrainians to sort of collaborate together in actually solving the enormous legacy of social problems there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yes, I did a lot of work last year on sort of trying to suggest some alternative peace processes in Ukraine. But anyhow, I'll have to let that one go.
Actually, Jan Olberg tried with the peace proposal for Ukraine, not once, a few times. And he is always surprised why people immediately say, yes, that looks great, but that is utopian. And that is not possible. So from the start, you just disregard any alternative, at least way of thinking or approaching the problem. So yeah, each of us is sometimes confronted with that dilemma. Should I analyze day by day the developments and react? And it is only reaction to development instead of proactive movement. And that's why I get back to intellectuals. If the intellectuals, and this is big if, because I'm not quite sure that everybody belongs to academia nowadays, if they are the collective mind, the best minds of society, of the world, they have to stand up and to use their reputation as people of mind, of wisdom, of knowledge, and to say we would not go on with your propositions and your recently I think there was a young professor from Denmark who resigned from his university. He was brilliant, a brilliant career, and he was working on drones. Some technical engineering, whatever it is. And he gave a wonderful interview in which he said, I resigned because I did not want to be a part of this killing machinery. The moment I figured out that the project we are running in my university would be for military purposes, I said, that's not for me. So each of us at some point has a moment of personal decision to say enough is enough. I'm not going, personally, I don't want to make a victim out of myself, but in many occasions, I would say no and be expelled from further conferences, projects, travels, whatever. So I usually say, yes, people invite me often to conferences, but only once, whenever they hear me saying the truth, because I believe that in what Orwell said famously, that the most revolutionary thing is telling the truth in time of general deceit. Then people don't want to see you again, and they say, okay, don't invite her next time. But luckily, we have these alternative forms of communication with the public, like Substack or podcasts or whatever. Yeah. So that's why we have a choice. I don't believe that we are so powerless that we have to accept anything. If something is against my moral credo, I would say no, whatever is the price. So that bears some price, but not the price that Palestinians or Iranians or Lebanese or any other people really suffer from.
Indeed, to invoke the author that was quoted by who was quoted by Mark Carney at the Davos in his Davos speech, Václav Havel. Living in truth is the power of the powerless in Havel's version of the essay. I think Mark Carney perhaps offered a living in half-truth version of the power of the powerless, the power of the middle powers.
To be honest, even Havel later on betrayed that by supporting military interventions and so on.
I totally agree. I totally agree. The Havel of the 70s was not the Havel as president, but then even perhaps even the Havel of after the president as yes. well. Indeed. Even in the this weird little world, I guess, that we inhabit of commenting on world affairs on YouTube and Substack and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you're from Macedonia, like a small country. I'm from Australia, well, continentally a large country, but, fairly small population and pretty marginal in the world. Even in Australia, we experience the phenomenon of West-plaining with, American commentators telling us how Australia is operating and just confidently asserting things which are complete nonsense. And I'm sure you experienced that many,
Yes,
many
definitely.
times. And I don't know about you, but certainly it's my perception that there's as I guess there always is in these kind of media environments, there's a concentration on a relatively small number of voices who sort of end up dominating a lot of the internet traffic, etc. And there's not the full diversity or plurality of voices that really comes through. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about your perspective. I mean, you speak explicitly about, like people from the periphery can think, or something like that. It's in your statement. I feel even, people from the far southern Pacific can think as well. What are your reflections on? Because in a way, this whole alternative media space has developed sort of kind of spontaneously over the last few years as people have been concerned about public events and concerned about the gap between reality and, mainstream media narratives. But it's also, formed around, I'd say, predominantly sort of American sort of perspectives on realist geopolitics. I mean, are there gaps that you see or perspectives that you see are missing from that sort of space?
Yes, you noticed well. I've mentioned that point a few times because when you have 7-8 billion people on the planet, you probably have many brilliant minds who can add something as a new perspective into debate. That's why actually I'm enjoying No Cold War. Because when I can talk to someone from Cuba and Korea and the Philippines and China, and it makes you feel part of the global community. This alternative media space, as much as it is good because it gives some sort of freedom, it's still gradually becomes influenced by capitalist logic, to be brutal now from the very start. Because, for example, if you tend, I know that you're not of that group, but I'm just giving an example. And of course, I don't want to generalize and to say all are bad. I have my favorites that I follow on a daily basis, and I enjoy their mind and everything. But there are others that I try to skip because they are just reciting one thing or another day by day. This capitalist logic makes not only me personally, but whoever comes from an unknown country, underdeveloped society, if I don't have a degree from a famous university and I'm not a celebrity, then your viewership would just see the name and say, okay, she's not important, so I wouldn't waste time. So people get used to, as we got used to follow the mainstream media, now we make this list of quite narrow, favorites to follow and to hear how they think, and then they form our opinions. So they are opinion makers. And you're right, they're mostly Westerners or with Western education or male and white. So now I'm going into feminist.
Well, it's very true. It's very true.
So I would like to really hear various voices, and that's why I am engaged. In addition to No Cold War, there is a wonderful peace group, Elderly for Peace Culture, and they are having this regular meeting, monthly meeting, exactly today, later today, I'm going to join them. It is such a wonderful group of people that are not publicly known. They're not celebrities, but I learned from each of them, and I feel encouraged by them. They feel encouraged by me. So we make this synergy, and we try to comfort each other, to share ideas about actions or petitions, whatever we can do. Unfortunately, I have to also mention this aspect that I feel a little bit depressed when I see that we are all mature, we're all, in this age of growing cold, let's put it that way, and the young generations are missing. So we need to also find the young, strong voices, because they will take the burden when we are gone. So we need to find them. They are there. There are people like that. I know from my classroom, for example, always there is 1, 2, 3, bright eyes and intelligent people that you can see that they have a potential. So each of us should cherish and nourish these young forces and to promote them, to give them a platform for promotion. Maybe at the beginning they won't be eloquent or relaxed, or it is not easy to talk to a general public, but they will learn. And I think that that is also something that we as more mature should do in order to, because we started with Professor Marandi, a wonderful man and scholar and a great patriot, and I appreciate all his work. We need young generations that even naturally, if we go out of late age, which is normal, there will be forces who would be spreading the truth and have courage to speak out the truth to power. And it is still a school. I think we are in a process of educating people. So that is my hope, that some of things that we say now will reach some corners of the world and some other generations, and women, of course, more women on the media. So that would make the whole idea much better for how we look at our future.
It's really interesting because I think Ulrika Gero, who I had on the program a couple of weeks ago, I think she was talking on her podcast, which I had to listen to in the auto-dubbed German version, which is one of the virtues of the new YouTube. She was talking about trying to connect the 60 plus with the under 30 generation within the sort of European peace project. So it's a similar idea. So hopefully that will spark off some similar sort of good ideas around the place. So we've sort of talked around the second part of your statement that I was going to quote, Biljana, which was that only a radical rethinking of Western responsibility and an honest engagement with human suffering, as we've talked about, can offer a path towards peace. And you've talked a bit about your thoughts on positive peace and Jan Oberg, but I guess one of the most, distressing, I find it distressing issues is the way in which the USA, to come back to our sort of no Cold War statement as well, at the moment is actively defying, effectively seceding almost from the United Nations. I wonder personally whether some of the countries like China, the BRICS countries, the Global South countries, India, etc., to be doing more, re-establish a effectively functioning multilateral system, recognising as a former government official they're dealing with a very difficult situation. But do you have any thoughts on what is a possible future for the United Nations that could actually perhaps bring what appears to be a rogue United States of America under control somehow?
If we start with the diagnosis that Jeffrey Sachs repeatedly conveys to the public, that United States are a rogue state. They are out of their constitution. The constitution is not working. The constitutional, this check and balances, and we have one reckless man with questionable mental sanity on the top, but I don't believe that he is in charge because there are people behind him who profit from all this. That is one part of this complex mosaic. The other thing is the dying United Nations. And, just as we celebrated somehow the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War and never again, and the Charter and all that, we are on this situation where we more often argue that United Nations are practically in coma. They are, for me, the most shocking latest resolutions in the UN Security Councils was first the one in November about Gaza and providing Trump with the possibility to establish this peace board. And this one about Iran that actually switched, that the aggressor became a victim and the victim became aggressor. And I noticed that recently in another debate that now we do not have a problem only with veto policy of these 5 permanent members that can always prevent any resolution to be adopted on that level. But now we have even, and I would not spare the countries that use their right to abstain. The abstention in this moral critical situation means consent, in my view. So I just see that it is going from bad to worse, the worst, I don't know. So personally, I don't really expect that the nations will all of a sudden wake up and change their minds and behave according to the charter. I think that Richard Falk is very right when he points out the disbalance in the very established, in the foundations of the UN. You have the most powerful body, the UN Security Council, made based on power politics and geopolitics of the time, but still relevant today, more or less. And then you have this utopian Gandhian charter that is beautiful, that is wonderful, and personally I have to be honest to say that some of our talks between me and Jan Oberg and the group and TFF would go into that direction, where I would be the harsh critic of the UN as it is now. Well, Jan still has optimism that it could be changed because we have nothing better than that. In my view, United Nations are not abstraction. They are made of the states. And as much as we can see from US state, from my state and others, we have the worst possible political elites actually that are in some neo-colonial entanglement and somehow restrained by their own national interests or regional interests. So there is no, each of them comes with some sort of stake into that, and balance this solution, the votes and decisions based on their selfish interests, I would say. So not always the global interest is taken into account. And I think that somebody yesterday, Einar Tangen, if I'm not wrong, he mentioned the possibility to somehow decentralize the initiatives. In terms of, he mentions from BRICS to Shanghai Cooperation Organization to Arab League and Mercosur. So all these regional organizations that are actually formed under the UN Charter, after all, legally speaking, that maybe the bottom-up approach initiatives should start from them. We need, I can write, you can write, we can talk, we can make statements, whatever, but still the governments have the power to really do something, because the UN is useless. What can we do at this situation when the situation is so bad that everybody speaks about Armageddon and long-term consequences for the humanity out of this Iranian crisis? UN are nowhere in the picture. Other conflicts are ongoing. The Gaza is still genocide, Sudan, Ukraine, and so I really cannot be so trustful and so positive in terms of UN. If they have a little bit of decency, I'm talking about the majority in the General Assembly, they would start to launch initiative to remove the headquarters from the territory of the state that is the main reason for all this mess in the world. We all know that they can sanction, not issue a visa to an ambassador, or to sanction Francesca Albanese or a member of International Criminal Court, or so they're doing whatever they want as they wish. So that should stop. Why not move the United Nations, or what is left out of United Nations, to Geneva or Vienna or somewhere or elsewhere in the world? Why not? In a more neutral terrain where everybody can approach and at least open an honest debate. As things stand now, I just see nothing good coming from the United Nations, except for their resolutions at the level of General Assembly. Unfortunately, my country is on such a wrong foot and in such a wrong side of history that we now are among these 7, 5, or 10 countries that vote together with United States, Israel, and the rest, So I'm really ashamed of that. So I really don't have hope that something will change soon on this field.
Yes. I do feel similar. Every now and then, I think over the summer, a fit of pique, proposed that, well, if the US doesn't want to be in the UN, the rest of the world should just go off and set up a new UN. And,
Exactly.
invite the
Why
US
not?
when it's ready to behave like a decent world.
Exactly. We know that such a move would not legally be processed in the UN Security Council as it is, but at least there would be an attempt, at least some action of resistance, of pointing out you should be kicked out because you do not obey the UN Charter.
And
Very,
I mean,
very simple. Looks simple, but
ultimately an institution is formed by the people who choose to belong to it and act together within it. And so I mean, I guess at some point, I think the world just needs to say enough is enough to America. But I fear, unfortunately, I fear that message will only really get through if there's a sort of, an experience of defeat, I guess, and a shaking of this sort of sense of impunity and invulnerability that seems to affect not just the worst, like not just the presidents or the deep state, but it's broader, I think, within the American political culture. But the League of Nations folded, was reformed as United Nations.
Nothing is forever, so maybe that is a good
forever.
news. Maybe there will be a new beginning.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a pretty optimistic note to end on. Now, even though it might also involve some pretty dramatic events, but I think ultimately, if the world could have formed the United Nations after an astonishing global catastrophe like the Second World War or the Great Imperial Wars, 1931 to 1945, as the historian Richard Overy describes it, then perhaps it's not beyond our power today. With so much more distributed knowledge and power around the world to do something similar, but in a new and improved version. Biljana, is there places we should just give everyone a little plug for your Substack before we finish off? There it is, wonderful Substack. The picture there that you feature, is that picture from the sort of former Yugoslavia, or?
Yes, it is a combination of the partisans, female partisans from the Second World War, and we have this third one with Palestinian keffiyeh, which transcends history and common. I liked it very much because, as I mentioned, I grew up in Yugoslavia, that was non-aligned country, that we grew in the belief that we are peaceful, that we are leaders in the world of the third world countries. So we are always with the oppressed, and especially Tito had great relationships with Yasser Arafat, with the Palestinian struggle. So we grew up with that sense of solidarity, of internationalism. And now when I am at quite age, I feel sad, that child that grew up with the idea about Palestinian suffering is now an elderly woman who still feels about the Palestinians. So it's really a symbolic picture, what I would like to convey.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, thank you for explaining the image to us, and I'll include links to your Substack below, and everyone should go over to Biljana's Substack, Biljana Vankovska, and subscribe. And you write there really quite regularly as well, and really some fantastic content, and you also share some wonderful content from other writers around the world. So thank you so much for joining me, Biljana. It's been a wonderful conversation. It's been wonderful to get to know you better. And
I enjoyed to talk to you personally, because we had our silent conversation on Substack, supporting each other's way of thinking. And I know that we have other things that brings us together, like poetry and literature. So it was really a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.